Welcome, NutritionRadio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in. Monday Market News from the food world. Hey, everybody. We've got a weird one today from the food world. A startup says it made a jumbo meatball using the genetic sequence of a mammoth. I'm looking at a picture here from Mike Corder at the Associated Press. It's bigger than a softball. It's under glass at the Nemo Science Museum in Amsterdam. And although I've seen some reporting on social media that I think was going off on tangents and, frankly, just partly incorrect, this was largely done, at least according to NPR, to draw attention to the cultured meat industry. We know that this is underway, that it's probably going to be appearing in the next year or two in the U.S., this time from an Australian company. Again, the launch was in Amsterdam, as I understand it. Quote, "This is not an April Fool's joke," said Tim Noakesmith, founder of the Australian startup Vow. He said, "This is a real innovation." Now, innovation meaning not necessarily for human consumption, but to draw attention to this idea that they can manipulate genetic sequences, and this is actually very Jurassic Park. Vow used publicly available genetic information from the mammoth, filling missing parts with genetic data from its closest living relative, the African elephant, and then inserting it into a sheep cell. Again, it says this mammoth meatball is a one-off. It hasn't been tasted. It was presented as a source of protein, though, just to get people talking about the future of cultured meat. And this article goes on to say some of the things that we've been talking about on Nutrition Radio recently, that it's potentially a good thing. Less animal suffering, less livestock being destroyed, more sustainable, right, to feed a growing population that is, in fact, still seeking meat, despite some of what you might hear on a lot of the media, reduced greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, we have a second mention here on Nutrition Radio from this Good Food Institute. In this circumstance, Saren Kell. Again, this is that nonprofit that promotes the cell-based alternatives to animal products. But the quote here is that the hope is that the project will open up new conversations about cultivated meat's extraordinary potential to produce more sustainable foods. Now, despite all this, they do go on in a kind of culinary sense, saying it was first slow-baked and then finished off on the outside with a blowtorch and that it smelled good. Apparently the folks that were there commented that the aroma was something similar to crocodile. And although that may sound weird to some of you, they also point out that this is fascinating because this is an aroma that humans haven't typically smelled as a population for a very long time, that indeed, we have eaten crocodile before. Where they get crocodile from, that combination of genetic material, I'm not sure. But this reporting says that more than 100 companies around the world are working on cultivated meat products. I think we mentioned at least 80 before. It probably depends on which countries that they're including in their analysis here. And many of them are, in fact, startups like Vow. Whenever there's a disruptive technology like this, I suppose that publicity stunts are part of it. It is fascinating and a little disturbing, though. I mean, they go on to say livestock doesn't need to be killed to produce this cultured meat. Now, the truth is, we've already touched on this in a little bit of a deep dive where we looked at the fact that, yes, a lot of these animals after repeat biopsies probably would, in fact, be slaughtered, still far less than typical livestock methods. And I have to say, when I read that more than 100 companies around the world are working on cultivated meat products, and then they present this sort of Jurassic Park genetic meddling on top of it, I do wonder, cultivated meat products of what? I suppose that's kind of the point of this publicity stunt, is to say, look, mammoth, right? We have the genetic code from that, from, specimens that have been found in bogs and that sort of thing around the world. But what else could possibly be on the table? Quite literally on the table. What kinds of animals? Now, we don't have the genetic sequences for everything, probably, but it does really suggest there could be this huge variety of meats. And, as a nutritionist, this makes me wonder, what could some of these meats offer nutritionally that others do not? On the good and the bad side, very weird stuff that we could not only have such a huge variety of plant crops, that are being shown. But what about animal? Very weird. For the time being, though, Singapore is the only country that's approved cell-based meat for consumption. Vow, in fact, is hoping to sell its first product there, a cultivated Japanese quail meat, and that's going to be later in 2023. So this stuff is coming at us pretty quickly. The FDA, as we've talked about before on Nutrition Radio, is sort of paving the way. They're not really pushing back very hard on these companies. And we're going to see if the price comes down to a point that it's on par with traditional livestock meats. This may be the way we do it. I don't have a problem with this personally. I know that's just my opinion. And I wonder how many people that I know that are hardcore carnivores aren't just sort of literally salivating over what kinds of meats are going to come down the pike here in this regard. The whole thing does throw a huge monkey wrench into the usual ethical arguments that sometimes you'll hear from people who are vegetarians. Now, they might still say that meat's not good for humans. I strongly disagree with that as a nutritionist and a physiologist, but at the same time, the ethical part's not there. Their animal suffering is vastly reduced and that sort of thing, better for farmers, etc. So if you're disturbed by this or excited by it or what have you, feel free. You can leave a message on our backup on YouTube. You can search Lawnman07 within YouTube. Check us out on iTunes. Thank you for the people who are starting to review the show. It really means a lot as far as the way Apple notices the show. But that's going to be it for this week's news, and look into the weird future of nutrition and technology. We'll see you later. The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.